All right, I am recording, so if you have friends who are not able to make it, you can let them know that we'll put a recording up when we're done here. I'll record the one in the afternoon too in case of different questions coming up, okay? So, all right, should we get started, Mary?
Yes, let's do that.
I just got a notice that your Otter AI is taking notes for me, Mary.
Oh, well, good. Hmm.
All right, everybody, it's really good to see you again. Thank you for joining us yesterday, also for that half day with Lead Forward. We're just going to go through a few things this morning that might be, that are, a lot of you have been asking about that are going to give you some good information, okay? So, to start with, this is the information about the third 9 weeks ECR. I should have written, well, it's about all the CBAs. So just take a minute to sort of understand this graphic. We want everybody to know that in each grade level, some of those common assessments are required and some of them are optional. You can basically think of it as if it's a tested subject in that grade level, it's going to be optional this time around. So for example, third grade, they're going to be required to do that ECR, which we've talked about. And then social studies and science are required, but optional RLA and math because you've just taken interim and you have interim data with those, so you don't necessarily need more data at this point. The same goes for fourth grade. In fifth grade, they're not required to take the science CBA because they're taking that science interim. Okay. So just kind of understand how all that, what's required and what's not required so that you can talk to your administrators about that. And then again, just to reiterate, the window for the ECR, you're going to want to make sure that your students take that test next week and that the teachers have scored it by March 6th. Okay. And then any other CBAs such as social studies, science, etc., those are all the window opens the 23rd of February and it's open till March 6th, which is that last day before spring break. Does this make sense? Are there questions about this calendar? Okay. That ECR that students will all be taking next week, these are the prompts. Um, I'm trying to think third and fourth grade, those are both release STAR
Third
tests.
was the release
Hmm.
from the very first star, so
Yep.
that should be familiar.
Yeah, and fourth is also a release from last year. So what that's helpful with is that you can use the scoring guides that are on TEA in order to help your teachers calibrate and score these. We needed to get an argumentative prompt in this time around, and fifth grade does not yet have a released argumentative prompt. So that's why there's not a scoring guide for this one on TEA. That makes me suspect that maybe they'll have an argumentative one this year, but I'm not really sure, right? I don't have that information. So you can get these. I'm going to put these scoring guides up in our coaches group for you, but you can also find them on the TEA website. Mary, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't think so, other than, well, were you going to talk about them PLCing with their teachers
Yeah,
about?
yeah. So just like we've done in the past, you do want to make sure that you calibrate with your teachers. You can use that same form that we've used before. I'll hang it again in this month's meeting so that you don't have to go searching for it. But do make sure that you calibrate with them. The third and fourth, like I said, are going to be a little bit easier to calibrate because you have that scoring guide from TEA. But do go through that fifth grade one also with your teachers to make sure that everybody's on the same page before they score. Okay.
I will let you all know that it's real important that you do this with the teachers. And one of the things that we're suggesting is that after the kids, if possible, after the kids take this, that you score it together as a group. Um, because we're still seeing teachers that are scoring kids either too high or too low. And we want to have the most accurate information that you all need so that as you progress between now and getting to symposium, that you have plenty of time to address those issues with students on where they're still needing assistance, okay, with the ECR. So we're suggesting that if you give this test this week, this coming week, then the following, as soon as possible, to go ahead and get together in a PLC and score those ECRs. That way the teachers have the data, they're ready to go. That would still give them another week to then conference with the kids during small group about what they did on this argumentative. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay.
All right, so Mary and I had the pleasure of meeting with your principals a couple of weeks ago now, and we talked about small group instruction in a similar way that we did with you all last month, I believe it was, or 2 months ago. So they have an idea of what they should be seeing in classrooms regarding small group instruction. You want to start to think about how you can help your teachers group their students based on their ECR scores. Okay, so thinking about, I've got this group of students who are still at a 0 and a 1 and they really need help right now just responding to that prompt, getting the correct answer, right? Or I have this group of students that, they're getting there, they're at the 2, 3, and they've answered it, they maybe have a piece of evidence, they need some help expanding on that evidence, explaining it, and maybe with their organizational structure. And then maybe you have your 4s and 5s who, they're there, but they can always use more assistance in revising their responses to make them a little bit more clear. This is going to help your teachers when they work during that small group instruction time to make sure they're really targeting what students need in writing. And, on a daily basis, just making sure that everything, is based on your data with that ECR. So just start to think about that as you score with your teachers so you can help them formulate that plan. Mary, did you want to talk about this?
Okay, so in addition to what we got yesterday, the information, I think it was good information for us to be thinking about that for us, symposium is a 2-week review. And those dates are when we come back from spring break up until April 6th. So, some things you need to think about. Are you ready for that 10-day review? And if not, what do you still need to prepare? So you need to think about whether or not you're going to do a symposium where teachers keep their own students. They're working just with their own students, but they're very targeted and specific in their review. Are you going to do the type of review where they're rotating through teachers? And so that you're looking at your teachers and their strengths, and you're saying, based on our data, this teacher does really well with editing, revising, so we're going to have all the students rotate through that teacher. That's kind of up to the campus and how you want to do that, but it can work either way. I've seen symposium work really well with either model. Okay. We also want you to remember that the district curriculum calendar allows 2 weeks for symposium after spring break. So your teachers still should be teaching curriculum at this time. And so I know that a lot of the campuses have said, we're just going to stop instruction altogether. We're going to do nothing but star passages. I would encourage you to do that in a different way. If possible, maybe you can do that star practice during WIN, or, at least internalize with your teachers and look at the curriculum and what is being covered in that curriculum, and making sure, because like we talked about yesterday, as Sonia explained, or Sophia, I'm sorry, from Lead Forward, those 2 weeks of symposium are strictly for review. So we still need to teach whatever we need to teach right now. And not just maybe first teach, but we need to, you're looking at your data, you're focusing in on the standards that were low for your teachers. That requires a direct teach again. And so the 2 weeks of symposium are not about direct teach. They're just about reviewing. So right now, we still need time for direct teach. Because if you're looking at a passage, the passage might have one question on author's purpose and craft, And if your direct teach, your data is showing that they need more help with author's purpose and craft, showing them one question on a star passage is not direct teach. Okay. So finding a way to do both. And I know it's juggling a lot, but we still have time in the year. And so we don't want to just stop and start just practicing star passages, because doing that prevents us from continuing with that first teach that a lot of them still need. Okay. And then also, so for the writing practice, I want you to think about this as well. You could have, if you follow your block and you have a certain amount of time for your reading, using your amplified lesson, just doing the reading part of the amplified lesson so that you're still exposing kids to higher level vocabulary. You're going through all the comprehension skills with them. You're doing the literary text. You're also doing informational text. You're still having poems and plays, although fourth and fifth should be done with poetry and plays. But third grade, it's Laura has that in there now for we have that in there now that they're doing poetry. So making sure that that's being covered. And then if you're doing a 30 to 45-minute block for the writing small groups, that is truly first teach as well as review, practice review. You can give them an editing, revising practice page that you can have the kids go through. You're also pulling them up and giving them a lot of help with their ECRs as a teacher, because you're pulling them up for small group. And you're having them write an ECR every week and then going through it with them. Okay. So making sure that we kind of have an idea of how we want to do that, and not just stopping everything right now and doing just passages. Okay. Also, when your teachers are going through their passages with kids, we really need to guide them and help them. And maybe perhaps you can go in and model that they need to go through the passage in an instructional way with the kids. They don't need to just give them the passage, have them answer the questions, and then go over why they got things wrong. They're never going to see that passage again. They're never going to have those exact same questions again. So it's a lot of time wasted on that particular piece of text. What they need is to be guided through, how should I be thinking? What kind of annotation should I be doing? And with the questions, they should be taking them through whatever strategies they want them to use for test taking, right? On the questions, not going back and going over why they got things wrong. That's and I'm just, I have seen a lot of wasted time with that. So be thinking about, how can I go in and kind of model that for teachers so that I'm showing them this is what we mean by STAR preparation. We mean getting them ready on how to tackle a piece of text, not how to go back and go over what they got wrong. Okay. Because that won't matter on STAR. All right. And then so in February, for your February artifact, once you all have your symposium plans completed, and of course you're going to sit down and you're going to have a lot of scheduling talks, because math is also going to be wanting symposium, science as well. But our test comes up first. And so that first 10 days back, we really need to have the priority be on reading. But again, it can't be all day of reading, right? So we need to sit down with your ILT team and really plan out. And then once you have those symposium plans done, just upload it into the February folder. Okay. Okay, Laura. So here are some materials that we know of that are available for symposium with the district. So you can have kids get on the Cambium practice, onto Cambium, so that they get practice on the platform. And that's a perfect time when you can ensure that any accommodations or anything that they have, that the kids are used to that and are used to using it. So Cambium has those practice ones. I believe when you're on those, you might have to have the kids write their answers on a piece of paper, because it's not gonna It's not going to score it for you. Okay. So just let your teachers know that. You also have for writing, of course, we've talked about these resources all year long, but you have iExcel. You also have in the iReady, in the Ready Texas, there are actual grammar lessons. And then in ThinkUp, there are the passages with the mistakes where they can practice what it's like on STAR. Okay. But if they need additional lesson on prepositions, then go into that Ready Texas and find those lessons on prepositions, and then the teachers can do that with them during the writing block. Also, the HMH, those are grammar lessons. They're not practice. And then we are really highly encouraging you all to use those Scholastic short reads for ECR and SCR practice. So you can go in, pick a passage that's on grade level. Okay, yes, they're level text, but you pick one that's on grade level. And then the teachers the first time really should go through it, read it with them, have them do the thinking as they're reading, and then either create an SCR or an ECR. If they look at the teacher guide that comes with those Scholastic short read resources, there is a question that you can use for an SCR or an ECR. Okay. So those are available. And then, of course, for reading, you have iExcel, you have ThinkUp, and then whatever campus purchase materials you all have, if you have Star Ready or whatever it is that you're using. And then, of course, for that 10 days, you have the resources that were shared yesterday from Lead Forward. And so I have that link there for you and the code so that if you weren't there yesterday, that is what you can download. And then you have all sorts of materials from Lead Forward that you can use. Okay. So again, we're talking about the 10 days. Here's some suggestions for symposium. This was reiterated yesterday by Sophia. When you're reviewing, that's all you're doing. This is no longer the time for new material, for a reteach. That needs to happen right now before we go on spring break. So when they come back for those 10 days, it's strictly reviewing. And so she had talked about hitting those readiness genres, which are informational text, but also within that an argumentative text, if you're able to find that in ThinkUp, which you can. So that you are reviewing central idea, text features, how an author organizes or structures a piece of text, and then the claim and how students can identify claims. In fictional text, now is the time to really focus in on those literary elements, plot, setting. I would encourage you all to go and look at the questions from this last interim. It looked to me like they're really stepping it up. And so some of those questions, I was like, wow, this is not things that we're used to seeing. I saw questions about setting and how setting is impacting the plot, not just what was the setting. So have your teachers and you all sit down and really kind of look at the way they're questioning on this last interim, so that as they're doing a reteach right now or going over that information with kids right now, they're really touching in and using that kind of vocabulary when they're teaching.
Just to add to that, Mary, I think
Yes.
that part of that is, it's a continual work, right? But helping our teachers understand what that standard says at their grade level. So like that setting standard that Mary mentioned, it doesn't just say identify the setting of the story. It says something like understand or explain or analyze how the setting of the story affects the advancement of the plot of the story. So that's part of, I think the problem is that, again, we've talked about this with author's purpose and craft, is that we tend to teach here when really the standard is is hitting up here. So be careful with reviewing those questions on the interim. Don't make it look like you're doing a PD when you're projecting them or anything, because we're not allowed to do that. But you can get into Cambium and see what was asked and how it was asked.
And there's no way really, there's no way to print it out, right?
No,
No,
you're not being
because
able to print it. Mhm.
Because again, it's not, you won't see the passage. You'll just see the questions and the way the questions were asked. It's not for, it's secured materials. So they are releasing the questions so that we can see the item types and how they're being tested. And that's what I'm suggesting you do, is go in and look and see how they're testing that particular standard, so that teachers, when they're teaching, can be saying, well, let's look at the setting for this story and how is that impacting what's happening in the story, right? And I'll just give you a quick brief example of something I'm going to do in a classroom in a few minutes. When the setting is the desert, and it's very dry and nothing can survive in this dry desert, well, that affects the problem. That is the problem of the story, is that the setting is there. And then it continues because as they solve that problem, they bring rain to the desert. And so the desert changes, right? So it's how the setting affects the plot. And so teachers need to see that that's what they're asking kids to be able to do, and that's how they need to approach it when they're teaching. Okay. Um, of course, the heavy load is also those comprehension standards. Even if your kids did well on inferencing, let's say, I'm just gonna, because we always pick inferencing, but I'll just pick inferencing. They may have done well on inferencing, but can they inference in all different types of text? And so that is something that we need to continually spiral and practice. All right. And then, of course, author's purpose is a huge part of the test. And so we need to remind you all, they can use a lot of those strategies. The zoom in strategy is a good one. It can work with any piece of text. It takes minimal effort or time from a teacher to just zoom in and say, why do you think the author did this? Why do you think the author bolded this word? Why do you think the author used this text structure? Right? And just get used to that being a everyday occurrence in the classroom. Then, of course, with the writing, they need to focus in on SCR and ECR. And then, like we know, the editing and revising, we tend to be lowest in revising. And so really having your teachers talk to kids about revision and using some of the strategies that we used for revision with the micro writing, the Scamper, and those type of things. Okay. All right, and then I took a picture of this. This might be something that you would do when you come back, is talk about, all right, the first 2 days that we're back, we're gonna talk about and review informational text, but we're gonna be focusing in on the comprehension standards. And then the next 2 days, we're going to zoom in on author's craft in informational text. So if you look at it, they're giving 4 days of really reviewing all of those informational text standards. Okay, so I would, again, you need to go into the reading standards and look at the characteristics of informational text. That's what's going to be tested, and that's what the kids need to understand and know, in addition to the comprehension. And then they have 2 days for fiction. And then they also start with the writing. And with the writing, they're talking about the ECRs. So they're talking about comprehension in fiction for 2 days. They're focusing in on the comprehension standards and writing an ECR. And then another 2 days of continuing with the comprehension, but also author's craft in fiction. And then finally, the last 2 days are dedicated to the ECR and editing and revising. Okay, so that's just a way to start thinking about it. Okay? All right.
Okay, everybody, take a step back and a deep breath. I always delete those emails that we get from Panorama saying your survey results are in, right? And I just happened to click on it yesterday. And I told Mary, this is really actually kind of disturbing because if you look at what the prompt of this question was, what feels hardest for you right now in your life? Well, there were different answers, about their parents and this and that. A couple of kids actually talked about some family member having cancer, and right next to that, they talk about the STAR test, both with a single A and a double A, and in Spanish, los exámenes. So I encourage you not to be drilling and killing and trying to get kids just to pass a test. But remember that our job is to prepare them as readers for their future. I realize that there's a lot of pressure on everybody right now, but just keep in mind that these are little tiny human beings that we're working with, and we need to understand kind of how they're functioning right now. These were some of the answers that they gave for that question. The thing that's hardest to look at all these, so many of them talked about that test, okay? But one of the things that Sophia talked about yesterday, and this came straight from the Lead Forward training, is that we cannot bore kids into learning. They're not going to learn anything, they're not going to get better, and they might even do worse by the time we actually roll around to the beginning of April. And so we just want to kind of keep in mind some of the active strategies that we've already gone through with you all this year and that you've done with your teachers, and think about ways to continue to aim for that student engagement in the classroom, because at the end of the day, our teachers are teaching content to young students, right? So just sort of keep that in mind. All right. We are keeping Amplify next year. We know there's been some rumors going around about whether or not we're going to have Bluebonnet. Liz and Amy, I believe, have been to a lot of your campuses already to talk about Bluebonnet for math, but that's only for math. We are still using Amplify at the very least for next school year. We're not sure how far beyond. So make sure that teacher materials and student readers are placed somewhere safe at the end of the school year. We're not going to be able to replace those. The only thing that will be replaced are the consumables. So just be real cautious and cognizant of that, because we know that there's been instances in the past of students taking home the readers and things getting damaged by floods in the summer and all sorts of things that can happen, right? So just be aware of that.
Laura, can I ask you something real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Regarding the materials for Amplify, since we're closing, does our AP know what to do? Are they collecting those? Are we supposed to, do you know anything about that?
Those materials will need to be collected by the warehouse. So the warehouse will pick up those materials. So I'm sure that I know Joel Valencia is in charge of the closing schools. So both you and Karina the AP will be given information about that. But yeah, all the TEs, everything will be collected and sent to the warehouse, and then the warehouse will distribute them and where the teachers need it. But also on top of that, Adriana and Karina, you all need to start packing up the Scholastic libraries. Those will not be dismantled. Okay. So go ahead and start packing those up. And then we, like with the campuses that closed before, we did redistribute those to other campuses. So if if Moy and Clendenin do not want those materials, then at that time we'll be able to disperse them to other campuses. But they are not out of adoption, and so we can't just give them away.
One thing I would add to that, though, is for Adriana and Karina, if you could collect the social studies books that we gave you, the ones that are for the monthly topics, and we will come get those from you personally, because I just don't want them to get lost in the warehouse. And the same goes for the Esperanza Rising unit, the novels and the teacher guides. Okay. All right, just a few announcements. We do have curriculum conversations coming up next week. These are the dates and the places, and you all should have already received that flyer. However, I am asking for fourth grade teachers who attend to please bring a copy of Esperanza Rising and their teacher guide. They're going to need that to go through some of the content that we'll do that day. So if you could pass that along to your teachers, And the same for fifth graders, if they could bring a copy of their novel, The Science of Breakable Things, because we'll be going through a little bit about how to teach a novel and what that really looks like. Okay, so I don't have a way to just email everybody. If you could let your teachers know, the ones that are attending, that would be very helpful for me.
We also wanted to let you all know that you all are always welcome to come to those curriculum conversations as well, if your principal allows you. We do go over what's coming up in the fourth 9 weeks and some strategies and things to think about for teaching. Okay.
Happy Valentine's Day.
That was short and sweet, and I think we can stop recording. Any questions that you all have?